A trembling brushstroke, a gallery full of strangers, and a past marked by fear. Annika Bauer has spent years running from what terrifies her most, until an unexpected encounter changes everything. Can art become her salvation, or will she remain trapped in her own labyrinth of anxiety? Discover the story of a woman who decided to stop running and face her greatest fear. The brush trembled in Annika Bauer's hand as she stared at the blank canvas before her. Around her, the Berlin Urban Art Center buzzed with the usual Thursday morning energy, students setting up easels, retired seniors gathering for their weekly watercolor class, the gentle clinking of coffee cups from the small cafe corner. Yet for Annika, each sound felt like a hammer against her consciousness, each movement in her peripheral vision a potential threat. At 34, she had mastered the art of appearing invisible while screaming inside. Her colleague, Markus Weber, the center's director, had noticed her lingering after hours in the empty studio, creating haunting pieces that spoke of isolation and fear. He'd offered her the teaching position 6 months ago, believing her talent could inspire others. What he didn't know was that each class was preceded by hours of panic and prayer in the building's small storage room. Annika's relationship with faith had always been complicated. Growing up in Stuttgart with her deeply religious grandmother Helga, she'd witnessed an unwavering trust in God that seemed as natural as breathing. But somewhere between her parents' bitter divorce when she was 12 and her first panic attack at 25, that childlike faith had morphed into something more distant, more uncertain. Now, her prayers felt like desperate whispers into a void that seemed to echo back her own fears. Her younger sister, Jana, kept urging her to seek professional help. "Nikki," she'd say, using the childhood nickname that now felt like it belonged to a different person. "God gave us doctors and therapists for a reason." But the thought of sitting in a stranger's office, excavating the layers of anxiety that had accumulated over years, seemed more terrifying than the panic attacks themselves. The breaking point came during last week's exhibition. Annika had been asked to present her series on urban solitude, a collection that had garnered attention from several local galleries. Standing before the gathering crowd, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the creeping numbness in her fingers. But this time was different. As the room began to spin and the faces before her blurred into a threatening mass, she heard a child's voice cut through the chaos. "Mama, the ladies' paintings show exactly how I feel when I'm scared at school." That moment of connection, brief as it was, had cracked something open inside her. The realization that her art, born from her deepest struggles, could touch others, made her question whether her isolation was truly protecting her or just keeping her from her purpose. This morning, as she faced another blank canvas, Annika found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, reaching for her grandmother's worn Bible that she kept in her art supply bag. The familiar scent of its pages brought back memories of Sunday mornings in Stuttgart, of Helga's kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh bread and coffee, of simple prayers that didn't feel weighted with doubt. Her hands still trembled, but now they held both the brush and a fragile hope. Perhaps it was time to stop viewing her anxiety as a wall and start seeing it as a door, one that might lead not only to her own healing, but to something larger than herself. In the quiet morning light of the studio, surrounded by blank canvases waiting to be filled, Annika whispered her first genuine prayer in years. "God, I don't want to run anymore. Show me how to face this." The Berlin Urban Art Center occupied a renovated textile factory in Kreuzberg, its industrial bones softened by years of artistic intervention. Exposed brick walls showcased rotating exhibitions, while steel beams overhead hosted hanging gardens, a project initiated by the center's founder, Dr. Elena Richter, a retired art therapist who believed in the healing power of creating beauty in unexpected places. Markus Weber, with his salt and pepper beard and paint-stained sweaters, had transformed the center from a simple gallery space into what he called a sanctuary for seeking souls. He noticed things others missed, like how Annika always positioned her easel in the corner where she could see all entrances, or how she relaxed slightly when classical music played through the studio speakers. His own journey through depression in his 40s had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of internal battles in others. The morning regulars formed an unconsciously protective circle around Annika. There was Frau Schmidt, a 70-something former high school teacher who brought fresh Brötchen every Thursday and insisted everyone take a break to eat together. Her no-nonsense attitude and quiet strength reminded Annika of her grandmother Helga. Klaus and Petra Zimmermann, retired doctors who had taken up painting as a hobby, often shared stories of their medical missions in Africa, their words painting pictures of a faith that actively served others. Among the younger crowd, Sophie Chen, a 22-year-old art therapy student, had been quietly persistent in befriending Annika. Her gentle approach and genuine interest in Annika's techniques created moments where anxiety loosened its grip slightly. Sophie's own background, growing up in a multicultural family that blended Chinese traditions with German Christianity, gave her a unique perspective on finding harmony in seemingly conflicting elements of life. The center's newest addition was Father Thomas from the nearby St. Michael Kirche, who had started holding informal conversations in the cafe corner on Wednesday afternoons. He wasn't what Annika expected from a priest. With his modern outlook and ability to discuss doubt as naturally as faith, he created a space where questions were as welcome as answers. The environment itself seemed designed to challenge Annika's anxiety while respecting its presence. High windows filled the space with natural light that shifted throughout the day, creating what Dr. Richter called living art on the walls. The open floor plan was broken up by mobile partitions covered in student works, offering pockets of privacy without complete isolation. The constant, subtle movements of the hanging plants created a gentle reminder of life's continuous flow. In this space, Annika's art had begun to evolve. Her earlier pieces, dominated by shadows and twisted urban landscapes, were giving way to something new. Hints of light were breaking through the darkness, not eliminating it, but transforming it into something more complex, more honest. The change hadn't gone unnoticed. Sophie had recently commented that Annika's newer works felt like visual prayers. As winter settled over Berlin, Annika's inner storm intensified. The Art Center's annual Christmas exhibition was approaching, an event that traditionally required each instructor to create a live demonstration piece while interacting with visitors. The mere thought sent her anxiety spiraling to new heights. One particularly difficult morning, after spending an hour in the storage room fighting off a panic attack, she emerged to find Marcus sitting at her usual spot, carefully studying her latest unfinished piece. The canvas showed a woman standing at the edge of a dark forest, her form simultaneously reaching forward and pulling back. Without turning, he said quietly, "You know, Annika, sometimes our greatest fears guard our greatest gifts." The words hit too close to home. She fled to the bathroom, where she encountered Sophie organizing art supplies for her afternoon therapy group. The young student's gentle "Nikki" almost broke her. How had she let these people get so close? It was easier when no one knew her, when no one expected anything. That afternoon, during Father Thomas's casual conversation circle, the topic turned to the biblical story of Jacob wrestling with God. Annika, sitting at the periphery while pretending to sketch, found herself inexplicably drawn into the discussion. "But why didn't Jacob just run away?" she heard herself asking, her voice barely above a whisper. The priest's response, perhaps because he knew that what he feared most and what he needed most were the same thing, followed her home that night. The crisis peaked during a preparatory meeting for the exhibition. As Marcus outlined the demonstration requirements, Annika's vision began to tunnel. Her chest constricted and the familiar numbness crept into her fingers. But this time, something different happened. Sophie, noticing her distress, quietly placed a hand on her shoulder and began breathing slowly, intentionally. Frau Schmidt pushed a cup of chamomile tea across the table, while Klaus and Petra smoothly diverted attention away from her. In that moment, surrounded by people who seemed to understand without her having to explain, Annika realized she was facing a crossroads. Her grandmother Helga had always said that God speaks through people, but accepting help meant becoming visible, vulnerable. It meant admitting that her carefully constructed walls weren't protecting her anymore. They were imprisoning her. The internal conflict manifested in her art. Her demonstration piece, which she worked on after hours, became increasingly chaotic. Layers of dark colors fought with breaking light, mirroring her inner battle. One evening, as she struggled with the painting, Dr. Richter appeared unexpectedly. The retired therapist stood silently observing before saying, "You know, in art therapy, we often find that our greatest masterpieces emerge from our deepest struggles." Annika's hands shook as she responded, "But what if I'm not strong enough to face it?" Dr. Richter's answer was gentle but firm. "Strength isn't about facing things alone, dear. It's about being brave enough to let others walk alongside you." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus announcing the final exhibition details. Over 200 people were expected to attend. The number echoed in Annika's head like a death sentence. That night, for the first time in years, she pulled out her phone and dialed her grandmother's number. As Helga's familiar voice answered with a warm, "Meine Liebling," Annika finally let her tears fall. As Annika wrestled with the upcoming exhibition, parallel challenges emerged that complicated her journey. Her sister Jana announced she was moving to Berlin with her teenage daughter, Emma, who had been struggling with her own anxiety at school. The news created a complex mix of emotions, a desire to be strong for her niece, warred with Annika's fear of being unable to manage her own challenges, let alone help someone else. Emma's situation eerily mirrored Annika's own teenage years. During their first weekend visit, the girl gravitated toward Annika's home studio, silently watching her aunt paint. When Emma finally spoke, her words were haunting. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning and everyone else is breathing just fine." The statement transported Annika back to her own youth, to the days following her parents' divorce, when art became her only safe harbor. Meanwhile, at the art center, Sophie's art therapy group had begun creating pieces for the exhibition. Among them was a young Syrian refugee, Yasmin, whose work captured the same sense of isolation that characterized Annika's early pieces. During one session, Yasmin's translator explained that the girl wanted to know if the teacher with the sad eyes would help her with her painting. The request created a new dimension of internal conflict for Annika. How could she refuse someone who spoke the same unspoken language of anxiety and fear? The situation with her parents added another layer of complexity. News of Jana's move prompted their mother to suggest a family reunion at the exhibition. The prospect of having both parents in the same room for the first time in 22 years, while she was supposed to be doing a public demonstration, seemed like a cosmic joke. Her father's gruff response to the invitation, "Well, someone needs to be there for our daughter," carried 2 decades of unresolved tension. Dr. Richter, observing these developing dynamics, suggested that Annika consider leading a small evening art group for people dealing with anxiety. The idea seemed absurd at first, but watching Emma and Yasmin find solace in art stirred something deep within her. Could her own struggle become a bridge for others? The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. Father Thomas, during one of their cafe conversations, shared a perspective that stuck with her. Sometimes our healing isn't just for us. Sometimes our wounds become windows through which others can see hope. The words resonated with the growing realization that her journey was becoming intertwined with others' stories of fear and healing. These subplot threads began weaving together in unexpected ways. Emma started spending more time at the art center, often sitting quietly beside Yasmin despite their language barrier, both girls finding connection through color and canvas. Jana, watching her daughter slowly emerge from her shell, began to see her sister in a new light. Even Marcus noticed the subtle shift, commenting that Annika's demonstrations during class had become more frequent, if still hesitant. The turning point came 3 days before the exhibition, in a moment no one could have scripted. Annika had stayed late at the center trying to finish her demonstration piece, while anxiety churned in her stomach. The winter evening had brought early darkness, and the studio was lit only by her work lamp and the city lights filtering through the high windows. The sound of sniffling drew her attention to the doorway. There stood Emma, tears streaming down her face, with a concerned Sophie behind her. Her niece had experienced a panic attack during dinner with Jana and had insisted on coming to the art center, saying, "Aunt Nikki will understand." Looking at Emma's trembling form, Annika felt something shift inside her. Without thinking, she did what no one had done for her during her first panic attack. She opened her arms. Emma collapsed into them, her tears soaking into Annika's paint-stained smock. For the first time, Annika found herself speaking about her own struggles, the words flowing naturally as she stroked Emma's hair. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes when I'm scared, I imagine my anxiety as a color. What color does yours feel like right now?" Through hiccuping breaths, Emma whispered, "Dark blue, like storm clouds." Annika guided her niece to a blank canvas. Together, they began to paint, dark blues swirling across the white surface. Sophie quietly provided more colors, and gradually other hues began to emerge. Light started breaking through the darkness on their shared canvas, not eliminating the storm, but dancing with it, transforming it. As they painted, Annika found herself sharing techniques she had developed over years of battling anxiety, breathing exercises timed with brush strokes, grounding methods using texture and color, ways to channel panic into expression rather than suppression. She demonstrated each one, realizing that in helping Emma, she was reinforcing these tools for herself. The pivotal moment came when Yasmin, who had been practicing late with her own exhibition piece, joined them silently at the canvas. Though they shared no common language, the three of them created together, their movements synchronizing naturally. Other evening stragglers were drawn to the spontaneous session. Sophie, then Marcus, who had been doing paperwork, and even the cleaning staff stopped to watch. As their collective piece took shape, Annika felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose stronger than her fear. She looked at her unfinished demonstration piece in the corner, then at the collaborative canvas before her, and suddenly understood what her art had been trying to tell her all along. Her journey wasn't just about overcoming anxiety, it was about transforming it into a bridge to others who thought they were alone in their struggles. That evening, in the quiet of the art center, surrounded by people who had become more than colleagues or students, Annika finally heard the answer to her prayer from weeks ago. God wasn't asking her to stop being afraid. He was showing her how to be afraid and brave at the same time, how to turn her weakness into a unique kind of strength. When Jana arrived to pick up Emma, she found her daughter and sister surrounded by a small group, each person adding their own touch to what had become a stunning piece of collaborative art. The sight of Annika teaching Emma how to blend colors, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, told Jana that something fundamental had shifted. The immediate aftermath of that evening rippled through the art center like a stone dropped in still water. Marcus, witnessing the transformation in both the art and the artist, immediately proposed making collaborative anxiety art sessions a regular feature. The suggestion no longer terrified Annika as it would have days before. Her family's reactions varied dramatically. Jana, who had always tried to fix her sister's anxiety, finally understood why her well-meaning solutions had never worked. Watching Annika connect with Emma through art showed her a different kind of healing, one that didn't require words or explanations. Their mother, upon hearing about the impromptu session, broke down in tears, confessing her years of guilt over how the divorce had affected her daughters. The most unexpected reaction came from her father. After years of dismissing anxiety as just nerves, he quietly asked to see the collaborative piece. Standing before the canvas, his usual stoic expression softened. "This is how it feels," he asked, pointing to the dark swirls intersecting with light. When Annika nodded, he placed a hand on her shoulder, the first real contact they'd had in years. Professional changes followed swiftly. Dr. Richter, who had been searching for someone to lead a new therapeutic art program, saw in Annika's approach something textbooks couldn't teach. The offer to head the program came with a suggestion to get formal art therapy training, a prospect that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Sophie, who had witnessed the entire transformation, began incorporating Annika's color-emotion techniques into her student practice sessions. She remarked that Annika had inadvertently created a new methodology for anxiety management through art, one that particularly resonated with those who struggled to verbalize their feelings. The most profound changes, however, were internal. Annika found herself sleeping better, the chronic tension in her shoulders easing. While anxiety still visited, it no longer felt like an enemy to be fought, but rather a familiar companion that could be channeled into something meaningful. Her art reflected this shift. The dark elements remained, but now danced with light in ways that spoke of hope rather than despair. Yasmin's mother, through her translator, shared how her daughter had begun sleeping through the night after attending Annika's impromptu session. The girl had covered her bedroom walls with colorful drawings, each one a reminder that fear could be transformed into beauty. This news affected Annika deeply, reinforcing that her own struggle had purpose beyond herself. Even Frau Schmidt noticed the change, commenting one morning over Brötchen, "You're finally letting your light shine, kind." The older woman's eyes glistened as she added, "Your grandmother Helga would be so proud." The words touched something deep in Annika's heart, reminding her of all the prayers her grandmother had prayed over the years. The weeks leading up to the Christmas exhibition became a testament to gradual but profound transformation. Annika's Thursday morning class evolved into something unique, a blend of traditional art instruction and what students began calling soul painting. She found herself naturally weaving breathing exercises into brush-stroke demonstrations, teaching color theory alongside grounding techniques. Emma became a regular fixture at the center after school, often bringing classmates who were drawn to this new way of expressing their own struggles. The sight of teenagers sprawled on the floor with sketchbooks, sharing their fears through art rather than suffering in silence, gave Annika a sense of purpose she'd never imagined possible. One afternoon, she overheard Emma telling a friend, "My aunt doesn't just teach art, she teaches people how to breathe again." The transformation manifested in concrete ways. Annika began keeping her studio door open while working, allowing the center's energy to flow in rather than shutting it out. She started joining the communal lunch breaks, discovering that sharing meals with others could be nourishing rather than nerve-wracking. Even her panic attacks, though not completely gone, became less frequent and more manageable. Her art underwent its own metamorphosis. The demonstration piece she'd been struggling with found its completion in a way she hadn't expected. Instead of creating something new, she decided to work on her original canvas in front of others, allowing them to witness the process of transformation itself. The dark forest from her earlier work remained, but now it was illuminated by streams of light breaking through the canopy, with paths leading both in and out of the shadows. Father Thomas, observing her progress, shared a perspective that resonated deeply. In the early church, healing wasn't just about the removal of suffering, it was about finding God's presence within it. This insight helped Annika understand why her anxiety hadn't simply disappeared with prayer. Instead, it had become a tool for connection, a way to understand and help others who felt similarly lost. The impact extended beyond the Arts Center. Local mental health professionals began referring clients to her classes, recognizing the unique combination of artistic expression and anxiety management. Dr. Richter's therapeutic art program proposal gained traction with the City Council, with Annika's approach cited as an innovative model for community mental health support. Perhaps the most significant growth came in her relationship with God. Her prayers evolved from desperate pleas for deliverance to honest conversations about fear and trust. During one particularly meaningful session with Father Thomas, she realized that her journey hadn't been about escaping anxiety, but about finding purpose within it. Sometimes, she told him, I think God doesn't remove our struggles because they're the very tools He uses to help others. This understanding deepened when she received an unexpected email from a former student's parent sharing how their child had finally opened up about their anxiety after seeing Annika work through a difficult moment during class. You showed them it's okay to not be okay, the parent wrote. And more importantly, you showed them how to create beauty from their struggles. The growth wasn't always comfortable. Each step forward required conscious choice, a deliberate decision to remain open despite the instinct to withdraw. But as Marcus noted one evening, watching her work with a group of anxiety-prone students, you've stopped running from the storm, Annika. You've learned to dance in the rain. The week before the Christmas exhibition brought both challenges and unexpected blessings. As the center buzzed with preparation activity, Annika received news that added another layer of complexity to the upcoming event. Her grandmother Helga had decided to make the journey from Stuttgart, despite her fragile health. The knowledge that Helga would witness her granddaughter's transformation firsthand filled Annika with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. This was the woman who had first placed a paintbrush in her hands, who had whispered prayers over her during childhood anxiety attacks, who had never stopped believing in God's purpose for her life, even when Annika herself had lost sight of it. Final preparations took on an almost ceremonial quality. The collaborative piece created with Emma and Yasmin was given a central position in the exhibition, its placement carefully considered to catch the morning light. Around it, Annika arranged a progression of her works from the past year, telling a visual story of her journey from isolation to connection. Marcus worked quietly alongside her, helping to hang the pieces while sharing his own story of transformation. 10 years ago, he confided, I couldn't have imagined standing in a room full of people either. Now look at us. His words carried the weight of shared understanding, a reminder that every person in the center had their own story of overcoming. Sophie and her art therapy students created an interactive installation where visitors could contribute to a collective piece inspired by Annika's spontaneous group session. The wall-sized canvas waited blank, ready to receive the emotions and experiences of countless others who might need this form of expression. Even the physical space seemed to be preparing for something significant. The winter light streaming through the high windows created ever-shifting patterns on the walls, as if the building itself was breathing with anticipation. The hanging gardens, carefully tended by Frau Schmidt, had bloomed unseasonably, adding spots of color to the industrial space. The final test came during the dress rehearsal. Standing before her demonstration piece, Annika practiced the technique she would share, her voice growing stronger with each run-through. Emma and Yasmin sat in the front row, offering silent support and occasional thumbs-up signs that brought tears to her eyes. On the eve of the exhibition, Annika received a package from Helga, her grandmother's old paint-stained Bible, bookmarked to Psalm 56:3, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Tucked inside was a small sketch Annika had made as a child, a simple drawing of light breaking through clouds. The sight of it brought everything full circle. That night in her studio, Annika made one final addition to her demonstration piece, a small figure standing at the edge of the dark forest, not alone anymore but surrounded by other figures, their hands linked in solidarity. The brush strokes were sure and steady, guided by a vision that had been waiting to emerge all along. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and cold, Berlin's winter sun casting long shadows across the art center's wooden floors. Annika arrived early, her grandmother's Bible tucked in her bag like a talisman. She found the space already humming with energy, Marcus adjusting lights, Sophie arranging refreshments, and Emma helping Yasmin set up their shared corner. The first surprise came when her father arrived an hour early, dressed in a suit that spoke of effort and importance. "I wanted to see it all through your eyes first," he said quietly, standing before her year's worth of work. Together, they walked through the exhibition, his questions becoming more understanding with each piece. When they reached the collaborative anxiety piece, he stopped, cleared his throat, and said, "I'm sorry I didn't understand before, Nikki. I see you now." People began arriving in steady streams. Family members, art enthusiasts, local mental health professionals, and curious community members. Annika felt the familiar tightening in her chest, but now it was accompanied by something else, a steady undercurrent of purpose that anchored her. The moment that crystallized everything came when Helga entered, supported by Jana. Her grandmother's eyes, still sharp despite her aged frame, took in everything: the progression of paintings, the interactive installation, the gathering crowd. When she reached Annika, she cupped her granddaughter's face in weathered hands and whispered, "This is what God meant all along, meine Liebling. Your darkness became a light for others." As the demonstration time approached, Annika took her position before the blank canvas. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the brush, but when she began to speak, her voice carried clearly through the hushed space. She shared not just technique but truth, about anxiety, about fear, about finding God in the midst of struggle rather than just at its end. The demonstration evolved into something unexpected. Others began adding their own touches to her piece. First Emma and Yasmin, then other students, each contribution telling part of a larger story. Even her mother stepped forward, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, adding strokes of color that spoke of her own journey through divorce and regret. The climactic moment came when a young girl, perhaps 12, pushed through the crowd. "I feel like that too," she said, pointing to the darker elements in Annika's paintings. "Like I'm drowning in air sometimes." Without hesitation, Annika handed her a brush, and together they began adding new elements to the canvas, fear and hope intertwining in vivid strokes. What followed was unprecedented in the center's history. Spontaneous testimonies began emerging from the crowd. People started sharing their own struggles with anxiety, depression, and fear. The exhibition space transformed into a sanctuary of shared understanding, art becoming the language that bridged the gaps between isolated souls. Father Thomas, standing near the back, caught Annika's eye and nodded, his expression confirming what she now knew deep in her spirit. This was never just about art or anxiety. It was about God using broken things to create something beautiful, about fear becoming a gateway to connection rather than isolation. As the winter sun began to set, casting golden light through the high windows, Annika stood surrounded by family, friends, and strangers who no longer felt strange. Her grandmother's Bible verse echoed in her heart, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." But now she understood. Trust wasn't just about holding on through the storm. It was about letting your storm become a shelter for others. 6 months after the Christmas exhibition, the Berlin Urban Arts Center had evolved into something its founders hadn't imagined. The Healing Through Art program, as it came to be known, now operated 3 times a week, with Annika leading a team of facilitators trained in her unique approach, combining artistic expression with anxiety management. The change in Annika herself was profound. While anxiety remained part of her life, it no longer defined her existence. She had learned to embrace it as a gift that enabled her to connect with others who felt lost in their own storms. Her art reflected this new understanding. Her pieces now regularly featured the interplay of light and shadow, teaching others that healing wasn't about eliminating darkness, but about finding meaning within it. Her family dynamics had shifted dramatically. Regular Sunday dinners became a tradition, with both parents attending, their old wounds slowly healing through shared meals and honest conversations. Emma had blossomed, using her aunt's techniques to help other teenagers at her school. Jana often joked that anxiety had actually brought their family closer, teaching them to be honest about their struggles rather than hiding behind facades of perfection. The impact rippled beyond the center's walls. Mental health professionals throughout Berlin began incorporating art-based techniques into their practices. Dr. Richter's program received full funding from the city council, allowing for expansion into other community centers. Even Father Thomas started incorporating art therapy elements into his pastoral counseling sessions. Annika's grandmother Helga, though still in Stuttgart, remained a steady presence through weekly video calls, watching with joy as her granddaughter grew into her purpose. "Sometimes," she told Annika, "God uses our deepest wounds to heal others. That's the true miracle." Perhaps the most significant change was in how Annika viewed her journey. What had once felt like a curse had become a calling. Her morning prayers, once desperate pleas for deliverance, transformed into conversations of gratitude for the way God had used her struggles to create connections and healing for others. As she often told her students, "Our fears don't define us, but they can refine us." Sometimes the very things we run from become the gifts we give to others. 6 months after the Christmas exhibition, the Berlin Urban Art Center had evolved into something its founders hadn't imagined. The Healing Through Art program, as it came to be known, now operated 3 times a week, with Annika leading a team of facilitators trained in her unique approach, combining artistic expression with anxiety management. The change in Annika herself was profound. While anxiety remained part of her life, it no longer defined her existence. She had learned to embrace it as a gift that enabled her to connect with others who felt lost in their own storms. Her art reflected this new understanding. Her pieces now regularly featured the interplay of light and shadow, teaching others that healing wasn't about eliminating darkness, but about finding meaning within it. Her family dynamics had shifted dramatically. Regular Sunday dinners became a tradition, with both parents attending, their old wounds slowly healing through shared meals and honest conversations. Emma had blossomed, using her aunt's techniques to help other teenagers at her school. Jana often joked that anxiety had actually brought their family closer, teaching them to be honest about their struggles rather than hiding behind facades of perfection. The impact rippled beyond the center's walls. Mental health professionals throughout Berlin began incorporating art-based techniques into their practices. Dr. Richter's program received full funding from the city council, allowing for expansion into other community centers. Even Father Thomas started incorporating art therapy elements into his pastoral counseling sessions. Annika's grandmother Helga, though still in Stuttgart, remained a steady presence through weekly video calls, watching with joy as her granddaughter grew into her purpose. "Sometimes," she told Annika, "God uses our deepest wounds to heal others. That's the true miracle." Perhaps the most significant change was in how Annika viewed her journey. What had once felt like a curse had become a calling. Her morning prayers, once desperate pleas for deliverance, transformed into conversations of gratitude for the way God had used her struggles to create connections and healing for others. As she often told her students, "Our fears don't define us, but they can refine us." Sometimes the very things we run from become the gifts we give to others. Moving on to the epilogue, 100 words. 1 year later, Annika stands in the expanded studio space of the Berlin Urban Art Center, watching the morning light filter through the newly installed stained glass windows. a collaborative project created by her anxiety art group. Her recent book, Painting Through the Storm, sits on a nearby shelf, its pages filled with stories of transformation and practical techniques for using art to manage anxiety. As she prepares for today's session, a new student enters hesitantly. Annika recognizes that familiar look of fear and isolation. With a gentle smile, she picks up 2 brushes, hands one to the newcomer, and says softly, "Welcome. Let's start this journey together." If you're struggling with addiction, questioning your faith, or wondering if God can use you, know that He can transform any life, any workplace, any situation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Have your own story of transformation. Share it in the comments below. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.